it's a pleasure to be here, to be sharing a little bit about the Brazilian context of femicide, and also a bit of our research studies that we are conducting here. So as Dabney introduced me, I'm a professor of public health, and I'm also a member of the Brazilian Association of Public Health, Abrasco. And I think today, as Dabney mentioned, is a very special day. It's a day to remember both human rights, the Human Rights Day, and also the last day of the 16 days of activism. And I think it's a reflection that I was doing this morning that despite I am a man, I think we all need to engage in this fight against violence against women. So I'm very happy to be a man that is an ally of this combat. So yes, I don't know how familiar you are with the Brazilian context, with the Brazilian scenario. Uh, I think most of you are from Latin America or from the US. I noticed some of my students here also from Brazil. And we have, like it's a wonderful country. However, we had a terrible historical past. So our history was based on colonization, that we were colonized by Portugal. And this colonization process brought a huge unequal society. And it started 500 years ago with the First Nations genocide of our indigenous population. So 500 years ago, there were more than 5 billion indigenous people living here in this land. Now it was reduced to 1/5, so less than 1 million indigenous people currently living in the country. And apart from the First Nations genocide, we had also a terrible past of slavery. Brazil was one of the last countries to release the slaves that came from Africa in this international traffic of human beings. And this slavery process created a huge difference between Black people and white people. And currently, nowadays, it's still expressing in several different forms, including violence that I'll show you later on this presentation. We also had not so long ago past of a military dictatorship that ended only in 1985. So I was born during this period, and this was a period marked by torture and many riots and people fighting for their right, censorship. So you can imagine all this package, and you add to it the machismo culture, which is present in most of the Latin American countries. I would say in many countries, but especially in the Latin culture, this machismo culture that puts women as inferior to men. So all this scenario is currently on in Brazil, and so we have this femicide problem here, and the gender-based violence, which is terrible. And this is like an heritage of all this past that we live. So this is not something that appeared suddenly. It's something that was built. And I used to show this graph here, which is the World Health Organization multi-country study that was developed in several countries, including in Brazil. And it was a very important research to estimate the prevalence of violence against women, intimate partner violence against women. And we know that femicide crimes, they usually are preceded by repetitive cases of intimate partner violence against these women. So this study here estimated in several countries, including Brazil. And I hope you can see here, this is the column of the Brazilian data. And in yellow, it's the lifetime prevalence of physical violence from an intimate partner. So approximately 1 in 3 women are victims or were victims during their lifetime of physical violence. And also some 14% approximately are or were victims of sexual violence, which is also common even inside marriage. So rape inside marriage, when women do not wish to have sexual relations and they are forced to do so. So this is quite problematic. And as I work in the public health field, and we are very keen to count the size, to provide a dimension of the problem. And this report here analyzes different countries and the rates of female homicides. So we know that not every female homicide is a femicide, but many of them are. And between 83 countries, Brazil is considered the 5th highest rate of female homicides in the world. So the first is El Salvador, second Colombia, then Guatemala, Russia, and 5th is Brazil. And we can notice here that between the top 5, 4 are in Latin America. And another additional comment is that in 2010, Brazil was the 7th in this ranking. So now it's increasing, and it's not, this increase is not stopping. More recent data from between 2016 and 17. So in just 1 year, we had an increase, a growth of 6% of female homicides, women's homicides. And if we analyze in a longer period, in a period of 10 years, between 2007 and 2017, there was an expressive growth of 30% in the number of homicides of women in Brazil, so in just 1 decade. And if we talk about femicides, the growth was even higher. It was around 21%, and in just 1 year. So, and this is, we do not have the most updated statistics, because even now we are living under a government that wants to hide this kind of statistics. So we do not have the most updated data. And one thing that I would like to discuss here is the inequities, the racial inequities that we have here in Brazil, unfortunately. We have, as I mentioned you, a past of an historical slavery of the Black population. And we have differences between, in these homicide rates of women, it's a difference between, you can see here, in a 10 years period, while for white Brazilian women, the rates are decreasing. So you can see here from 3.6 to 3.2 in 2013, while for Black women, these homicide rates, they are rising. So it's in a opposite way, from 4.5 to 5.4. So this is the homicide rate of women per 100,000 women. And it's like increasing the gap between white and Black women. So it's quite problematic as well. And here in this other graph, it's the percentage of victims of femicide and other types of homicides against women. And it's according to race. So basically, we have 4 main types of race classifications here in Brazil. And despite Black women are only half of the population, they respond for more than 60% of femicides and 70% of the total homicides. So it's something very challenging for us to
Eu
deal
queria
with these
perguntar a ele e colocar a mulher, mas eu não sei como é que faz isso.
inequities. Um, so we also developed some studies in our research group about the homicides against the First Nation people, because these studies, they are very scarce in Brazil. So there's almost an absence of studies, especially epidemiological studies about indigenous homicide in Brazil, because they are like the minority of the minority. They're only 0.5% of the population, which is approximately 800,000 people. And in this study that we published in this journal here from a few years ago, the homicide rate of indigenous women was 9.3 per 100,000 women, and it was more than twice the rates of the non-indigenous women, which was 3.8. So indigenous women, they are, I would say, between the vulnerable of the vulnerable, because indigenous population is already vulnerable in Brazil, and indigenous women are much more exposed to homicides compared to non-indigenous women. So it's also another challenge that is present here in Brazil. And to deal with all these numbers, and I'm telling about numbers, but I know that they are persons behind these numbers. And this is the worst, the tragedy. Sorry. So the government, Brazilian government is creating some specific laws to deal with violence. The first one is called Maria da Penha Law, which is the first law dedicated to protect women against violence, specifically domestic violence. So this is the woman, her name is Maria da Penha Maia Fernandes, and she's a pharmacist, a biochemist, and she suffered repeated cases of intimate partner violence from her husband. And she denounced it to the police many times. And basically the police didn't arrested him. So he was like living free, like impune. And so he tried to kill her 2 times. And that's the reason why now she's in a wheelchair, as you can see here. So he tried to shoot her in her, he shoot her in her spinal cord. So she stayed paraplegic. And the second time he tried to kill her, giving an electrical shock, but she survived. So she's a survivor of 2 tentatives of femicide. And as he was not arrested, so she became an activist for women's rights. And she, as the government was doing nothing, she took this case for the international courts. And so these international courts, they condemned not the aggressor, but the Brazilian government to create a specific law to protect women against domestic violence. And that's the law, this law approved in 2006. And this law received her name as an honor. So she's still alive and she fights for women's rights currently in Brazil. But since the approval, here is the female homicide rate in general for all the different races. And as you can see, when the law was approved in 2006, in the following year, these statistics decreased. But again, they started to increase again in the following years. So only this law, which is very wide, and it involves different types of violence, like emotional abuse, physical, sexual abuse, economic abuse. But the government noticed that it was necessary to have a specific law targeting femicide. So this recent law for femicide was approved a few years later in 2015. And the femicide law qualifies the homicide crime, categorizing it as a heinous crime. So it considers the murder of a woman motivated by her female sex or gender due to domestic or family violence and or discrimination, specifically about the condition of being a woman. So this law, it increases the punishment of the perpetrator, and especially if the crime is perpetrated during the pregnancy or the postpartum period, or if it's against adolescents under the age of 14 years old, or if it's against older women from older than 60 years old, and also women with disabilities, or if it's in the presence of both of an ascendant or a descendant of these women. So in all these conditions, all these situations, the punishment is increased to try to protect women. And in this figure here, it's demonstrated the countries in Latin America, in our region, that have a specific legislation, a specific law targeting femicide. So most of the countries have one, and Brazil is included in this group. Now, this year, another recent law was approved targeting specifically psychological violence, because, you know, physical violence leaves scars in the women's bodies, leaves marks and provokes injuries. So it's, how can I say, with these marks, women can go to the police to file a report, and it's easier to prove that they were abused. However, psychological violence do not leave these kind of marks. So many of these aggressors, they were like using this gap to promote coercive behaviors, to humiliate women, to promote different types of psychological violence against these women. So the government again approved this specific law targeting psychological violence more specifically. And the federal government is also promoting other strategies to deal with that. Another law that was approved this year is regarding the National Risk Assessment Form. This is called FRIDA. And FRIDA is like a risk assessment tool, and it's targeting on the judiciary system, on the law system. So basically, when a woman reports the case to the police and they go to the court, the public prosecutors or the lawyers or the justice system as a whole will assess the risk of these women, the risk that she's having to suffer a femicide. So it's a form with different questions, and I'm sorry, here the questions are in Portuguese, but I will just read one of these here. It asks for the women, do you believe, for example, do you believe that he, I mean, your partner or the aggressor, is able to kill you? And then she asks yes or no, or not applicable. So for every yes here in this form, it generates a score, a number. So this is a very interesting strategy for the justice system, but it's only used in the justice system, in the legal system. And we in our group here, and Dabney shares this opinion with me, we have some concerns about this instrument because it was not built in partnership with women, with aggressors, or with the victims or the survivors, neither through a research study. For example, these questions were not tested. So basically a small group of people from the justice system, they created this form. So we have some concerns that would these questions be the ideal questions, and how scientifically would be these instruments, as we have different instruments internationally recognized and used in the literature, recommended. And so these other instruments were not taken into account to develop this one. So it's just a challenge that we have. So perhaps in the future, we have to test this instrument to see if it really fits with women's needs, women's demands, and with the reality here in Brazil. The government has also other strategies. I will not talk about all the strategies because there are so many, but one very important is the call 180, which is like a national hotline for women suffering violence, so they can clarify queries, they can obtain information about the services and the network, the available services for their respective area, how to look for help, and so on. So in this second part, the previous part was more a general introduction to the Brazilian context. In this second part, I will focus more in the translation of these policies into practice and also into research, and specifically about our study site. So we have this project, this study that is conducted in a specific place, a one-stop center for women in situation of violence, and it's called the House of the Brazilian Woman of Curitiba. In Portuguese is Casa da Mulher Brasileira. And here I like maps, and I think it makes easy to people understand where we are. So here's the map of South America and Brazil. This is the state of Paraná in the south. So we are close to Paraguay, Argentina, and Uruguay. And the capital of the state is Curitiba. It's the 7th largest city in Brazil. It has more than almost 2 million people. Here's a picture of the botanical gardens of Curitiba. And in this place, the federal government created this House of the Brazilian Woman. And the idea was to create one in each Brazilian capital. So we have 27 capitals, state capitals in the country, but that was in the previous government from the Workers' Party. It was our left-wing government, and it was very progressive to create this kind of facilities. But now this far right-wing government just stopped the implementation. So we have 7 of these houses so far. And in this place, we have a participatory action research study that is ongoing since 2018. And I will explain a bit about these studies that we are conducting, but I will show you a video about this place. It's a very short video of just 2 minutes. And I'm so sorry because it's in Portuguese with only English subtitles. But for those who will not be able to understand, I will summarize in the following slide. So I hope you enjoy.
A Casa da Mulher Brasileira integra todos os serviços necessários para que a mulher possa sair de uma situação muito difícil. Vítimas de violência têm todo o apoio, atenção e cuidado na casa, que funciona 24 horas por dia, todos os dias da semana, e dá todo o apoio necessário no caminho da libertação. Quem chega aqui passa por uma triagem com atendimento psicológico e social. Juizado de Violência Doméstica e Familiar, Ministério Público, Delegacia da Mulher e Defensoria Pública mantêm equipes na casa, assim como a Polícia Militar. A Patrulha Maria da Penha trabalha para que as medidas protetivas sejam respeitadas. E aqui, as mulheres têm transporte para serviços externos durante toda a permanência na casa.
O acolhimento que a gente faz com essa mulher. Aqui ela não se sente julgada, né? Não fazemos juízo de valores, não agregamos valor à demanda dela. Nós simplesmente acolhemos essa mulher e entendemos que ela passa por um ciclo e que o primeiro passo ela já deu.
A Casa da Mulher Brasileira não é um abrigo, mas ainda assim acolhe e ampara mulheres por cerca de 72 horas, de acordo com a necessidade de cada uma. Inaugurada em 2016, essa é a terceira Casa da Mulher Brasileira aberta no país. Administrada pela Prefeitura de Curitiba, ela é referência nacional no enfrentamento à violência contra a mulher.
So just to summarize what was shown in the video, this house works 24/7, so every day of the year, and it integrates the cross-sectoral network of services in just one place. So it has a psychosocial support where women can talk about their situation of violence and look for support, for guidance in her case. Health, a specialized police station so women can report a file. The Maria da Penha Patrol, which are municipal guards. You can see them here in blue, and they can escort women to their home, for example, to pick up documents or medicines if she needs to leave the home in an urgent case. It has also a court and a judge working there full-time, a public prosecutor's office, and also a public defender's office. So if women cannot pay a lawyer, they can have this free service there. Also a temporary shelter for women, their children, and even their pets, and also toy library and some financial autonomy workshops. As you can see here, there are some self-defense workshops, some different activities. This bus that goes through rural areas for campaigns, for example, now the 16 days campaigns. So it's a very important place. More than 100 staff work there to care for these women. So in this place, we have several studies ongoing. And one of these, I would say one arm that we are working is translating, culturally adapting, and piloting intimate partner abuse questionnaires. And why is this important? Because many of these instruments were developed and validated in English-speaking countries. And in Brazil, we have a lack of systematized instruments to measure, to identify situations of abuse, and even to evaluate women's situation and women's risks. So this first one that I'm showing here is the composite abuse scale that was originally developed in Australia. And we did cross-cultural adaptation for Brazilian Portuguese. It was conducted by Raíza da Rocha, who was my supervised master's student. Now she already concluded. And this process is important to conduct in partnership with the users. So it's not just to translate from English to Portuguese, but it's to show and to ask these questions for the women who are suffering violence and also for the professionals to see if they understand these questions, if these make sense. And it's this instrument here is very important to be used both in health services, in social services, also in the legal system to evaluate, because it creates a score from up to 150 points So sometimes if you want to measure the abuse and also to identify women abused, for example, in primary healthcare settings, you can use this instrument. So this is very useful for the Brazilian context. Another one that this is in partnership with Professor Dabney Evans, who's here with us today. She and her group translated the danger assessment, which is an instrument to assess the risk of femicide. And we conducted a pilot study at the House of the Brazilian Woman of Curitiba. And this pilot was both with women attended there and also with professionals. And particularly with professionals, we published the study here this year in this journal. So I can leave this presentation for you later if you wish, with these references. Professionals were were very enthusiastic about this instrument because it helped women to perceive themselves as living in an abusive relationship. Because sometimes the questions, women do not realize that some women, I do not want to generalize, but some women do not realize the danger that they are living. For example, if your partner has a gun, if he threatens to kill you, even verbally. But so all these questions, then professionals, they highlighted in our research that women can put the pieces together like a puzzle. So they are answering the questions, and they realize how they are at risk. And it also generates a score. So it's a very important, a very useful tool to raise awareness and to decide. For example, even if they have just one position in the shelter, but they have many women, so how can they decide? These instruments can support to assess the risk of these women. Nowadays, we are translating and adapting other intimate partner abuse and other related questionnaires. For example, targeting technological abuse, brain injury, decisional conflict, safety behaviors and strategies, with the goal to create an app, or the idea is to adapt an app for women, specifically for safety planning of these women. Women that are living in abusive relationship. And this is inspired by studies developed by our colleagues from the United States, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. So the original proposal was developed by Professor Nancy Glass from Johns Hopkins University. She and her group developed my plan. And then it was like adapted and developed in all these different countries. And basically these apps, this set of apps, they help women to assess the risks and also to raise this awareness about the violence situation that they are living. And this was something that appeared in our interviews at the Casa. Many of the women, sometimes they naturalize abusive behaviors, abusive situations. Sometimes they do not see different acts as violence. So when they answer these questionnaires, they raise this awareness. But also the app is not just that, but it also helps women to create a tailored safety planning. So how if suddenly physical violence starts at home, how can I run? How can I define an escape plan? Where can I go? Who can I knock on the door and ask for help? So these apps, they help women to think and to design the safety planning according to their needs. We developed also a feasibility study at the house, at the Casa. This was also a master's thesis from a supervised student, Vera Silva. This is only published in Portuguese. But the idea is that all these apps were developed in high-income countries, English-speaking countries. Would that be feasible for the Brazilian context? So in her study, she found different potentials, such as these helps could help women to give the first step to break the cycle of violence. It could also be an anonymous tool, helping them to overcome shame and fear, because many women, they do not look for face-to-face services because they have shame or fear to go in a place like this. So the idea of the app would be to give this first step and also providing information for women. It also has, and this study was developed with survivors and professionals at the house. They also highlighted some challenges. For example, the safety of the user, because sometimes the aggressor could caught women using the app. So how can we deal with that to not put women in more risk? And also some barriers for the most vulnerable women, for example, those who do not have a mobile phone. And they also provided some suggestions, like to connecting users to the cross-sectoral network, and also making it easy to use with accessible language and so on. So it was a very productive study. And now we are developing this app. We are naming Eu Decido, which is I decide, yo decido, I believe in Spanish. And we are developing in collaboration with Emory University and Professor Dabney Evans, and the Casa, the House of the Brazilian Woman. So basically, women, it's not available yet. It's like, this is just a screenshot of the prototype version. So here it says, Bienvenida, welcome to Eu Decide, Eu Decido. And this quick exit button, if like she's in the aggressor is close to her, she can just press that and it just quits the app. So to not put her in risk. So she navigates through the app, and then she can answer all those questionnaires to evaluate her situation, to make her risk assessment, danger assessment, to see if her partner is abusing her, to perceive that. Then she can get some information about the laws, those laws that I presented to you, about the different types of violence, about the Maria da Penha law. And then she can, navigating through the app, she can do like an evaluation of what are her priorities. If it's the children or the resources, like to have a house or income, or if it's the feelings for her partner. So she can evaluate that. And then the app provides a tailored safety planning for her according to her needs. So for example, if her main objective or priority is her children, so she needs to it gives a lot of tips. For example, have you already talked to your kids about the situation that you are living, or if there's this like physical violence situation at home, have you already talked to your children to how to escape from home and where should they go? So these are different tips that may help and perhaps it makes the difference for some women. And the app also helps women to connect with the cross-sectoral network of services. This is the map of the city of Curitiba. And each of these colored points here has a service, for example, a primary healthcare unit where she can look for help, or a police station, or a social assistance center. And when she passes the button, or when she clicks one of these dots, It appears the name of the place, the address, the telephone number, and the operating hours. So it helps women to, if she decides to go to a face-to-face service to look for help, she can decide and go and maybe look for a professional help. So basically, you know, this is just a very briefly explanation of what we are doing. We are doing many other things and research studies in partnership. But you know, as we have a limited time, I think I try to summarize. And well, I'm here available to talk with you. Perhaps if you have some questions. I'd like to thank you for the audience here. So gracias, obrigado. And I would like also to thank Casa da Mulher Brasileira, which is our partner, to thank our university. Here's a picture of our university. To also thank Emory University, that is also funding our study here, all our collaborators, all our students that are doing a brilliant job there, a brilliant work. And just to tell a very brief story here, in this square in front of the university, there are these trees. They are the symbol of our state, Paraná. They are named Araucaria. In Araucaria, they are very strong. They live for many centuries. So they are, for us, they are a symbol of resistance. So the message here that I would like to spread is that sometimes we need to be like Araucarias. We need to be resistant. So thank you. Obrigado. Gracias.